Airbnb about 3 years ago. There was no occasion, it was more of just a weekend getaway to spend some time off from work. The Airbnb was a cabin 4 hours away from my hometown. The cabin looked like it was mostly isolated, only having 3 or 4 other cabins within a mile of it, and the woods were right in the backyard. This was just what I was looking for, and I was super excited. When I arrived early in the morning, I explored the property and messed around with some of the cool features. In the afternoon, I sat outside on the back patio in one of those swinging chairs, and as I was looking out into the distance, I saw a man walking in the woods. He looked like a regular guide from what I could see, and I figured he was probably staying in one of those other cabins. He walked deeper into the woods until I couldn't see him anymore, and I continued enjoying the nature. I want to say I stayed out there for almost an hour before going inside and making dinner, then sitting down to watch a movie at the end of the night. During this movie, the doorbell rang. I didn't even know the cabin had a doorbell, but regardless, I went up and answered the front door. A man standing on the porch, and I recognized him as the guy I'd seen earlier in the woods. "How can I help you?" The man smiled wide and said he'd been lost for a few hours and needed help getting back to his cabin. I paused for a second, knowing there was something strange about this guy, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. "Yeah, let me get my phone and you can search the address." I closed the door and went over to the couch, picking up my phone and going back, but when I opened the door, he was gone. He wasn't anywhere on my porch or in the front yard. I stood in the doorway for a second, then closed it and went back to the couch. I knew something was off about that guy, but this just didn't really make any sense. I stayed cautious for a while, but eventually I went to bed. I slept surprisingly well, and in the morning, I got up and went outside on the back porch to drink my coffee. But just 10 minutes later, I saw something I didn't expect to see. That man from yesterday was walking in the woods in the same place he was before, seemingly walking on the same path. One thing I knew for sure now was that he definitely wasn't lost. But then why did he come up to my cabin? I went back inside after seeing that and called one of my friends to tell them about this weird situation. It made me feel better to talk it over and have someone else be confused with me. But as we talked, I heard something that almost gave me a heart attack. The doorbell. I quickly whispered to my friend what was happening, and I left the phone call going while I answered the door. "Do you need something?" I asked. The man smiled and repeated the same thing he said yesterday about being lost and needing help. I looked at him with an annoyed and confused face. Then he spoke again. "Can you get your phone and search for the address?" My whole body went cold when he said that. I slammed the door shut and updated my friend, who told me I needed to get out of there right away. I agreed, hurrying to pack all of my bags. I checked the peephole to make sure the guy had left before I went out to my car. After shoving my bags in the back seat, I got in and started backing out. As I did, the man appeared in the front window, standing inside the house, and watched me drive away. When I got home, I contacted the Airbnb owner and let them know about this crazy guy who broke into his rental. His response was very short, and he didn't even seem worried about it at all. He just apologized for me disliking my stay. I don't know what he was trying to do, but it had my head spinning the whole time. Even now, I still don't know what his plan was, but seeing him standing in the window inside the house just 30 seconds after I left was the most horrifying and creepy thing I'd ever seen. I'm 29, and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lived just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, being anywhere from a few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. In the days leading up to the trip, though, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I'd already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead, then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail like you typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have defined paths, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically, there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward, and when you get there, you could see your next landmark, and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking toward a ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched the tent and got a fire going, then heated up some of the food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I lay in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up. My first thought was a black bear, possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else, though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight into the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators, but again, there were no sounds of anything running away. It was really strange because the stick snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something stepping on it. I stayed outside the tent for a while, looking around constantly before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else at the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, then pitched the tent and set up my camp on the tree line beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out here. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were, though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. And what I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up and grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of the footsteps. I saw the bare back of them running away in the distance. My heart was beating rapidly. I looked down and saw footprints all around my tent, like they had been walking around me and searching the campsite. I tried to get the campfire going again as fast as I could so I could see better. I was terrified. I had nowhere to go and nobody to help me. I sat at the fire all night, keeping my head on a swivel, but I never saw or heard anything else. In the morning, I snapped a few pictures of the lake, then started the hike back. I had planned to stay for a whole day. I wasn't comfortable anymore, feeling like I was being followed. I was able to make it back without any more trouble, thankfully. But along my journey, I began noticing several things missing from my backpack. Small things like food, a few tools, etc. But I always had my bag with me. Even today, I wonder if whoever had been outside my tent that one night had actually snuck inside and stole from my bag while I was asleep. Even the thought of it makes my whole body shiver. My roommate was out of the house for the week, so I had the place to myself. It was spring break, so my college classes were out too. I had no plans, and really nothing I needed to do. On Monday, I was basically trapped inside due to a huge storm blowing through our city. This was common around this time of year, but it still always seems worse every time it happens. The trees looked like they were going to blow away, and the house would shake and creak non-stop. Knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep, I decided to just stay up. I turned on the Xbox and started up one of my video games. I played for well over an hour, probably until 11 o'clock, when the doorbell rang. I paused the game and got up, but then I remembered the whole storm and everything. Who would be outside right now? I went over to the front door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door. The wind and water hit me right away, but when I looked around, I didn't see anyone. I closed the door and thought maybe the wind had somehow rang the doorbell. I don't know. It sounds dumb now, but what was I supposed to think? I went back to my game, but only a couple minutes later, I heard a huge crash in the backyard. Stuff tumbling over and breaking. I immediately knew it was our patio furniture and ran over to the back door. Everything was scattered around the yard, blowing around in the wind. I quickly put on my shoes and went outside. I started pushing each piece of the furniture up against the back of the house. The wind was so heavy, it would even hurt sometimes when the water would hit my face. I was rushing, going as fast as I could, but until I saw someone. They were standing at the edge of the backyard, watching me. I looked back at them for a moment, but then grabbed the last piece of furniture and ran inside to escape the rain. I looked out the back door as I dried off, but the person was gone. Between that and the doorbell ringing, I was a little bit nervous. I sat in the living room, this time just scrolling on my phone because I was tired of being interrupted. After a while, I struggled to keep my eyes open. I got a blanket and laid down on the couch. I didn't feel like going upstairs, and the storm was much louder up there anyway. It took a while, but eventually, I drifted into sleep. A few hours later, still well into the night, I woke up from a sudden burst of heavy wind outside, shaking the house. I pulled the blanket to the side and sat up, moving my feet to the floor as I prepared to go check if the furniture outside was still there. But just when my feet touched the floor, they were soaked. It woke me up immediately. I looked down and saw a puddle on the ground right next to the couch. Then I saw another and another, leading in a line across the floor. Inside the puddles were faint, muddy shoe prints. I stood up and ran to the corner of the room, heart beating rapidly in my chest. After a minute of hearing nothing but the wind outside, I slowly followed the shoe prints. They led all throughout the house, upstairs and downstairs, but I could clearly tell that they entered through the back door, which I had stupidly forgotten to lock in the rush of getting out of the rain. I locked it and pulled my phone out to call 911, but then the thought crept into my mind, what if they're still inside? I stayed quiet and moved into the corner of the house where I felt the most hidden, then called. I waited in silence for them to arrive. When they did, they took a look around, seeing everything I saw, but nothing more. They told me it seemed like a personal attack though, because nothing was missing and they were clearly focused on my house in particular. However, they walked right up to me while I was sleeping and seemingly did nothing but watch me, which is super creepy, but doesn't make much sense. If they wanted to do something to me, they would have at that moment. After some thought, this had led me to believe that whoever it was had actually come for my roommate. They saw me, then looked around the whole house, and then left, doing absolutely nothing. So if this was a personal attack, and my roommate was there, I think things may have gone a lot worse than they had. I was house sitting for one of my best friends last year. They had a few lizards and some fish that I had to feed, along with a bunch of houseplants to water. They were on a 2-week-long business trip, so I agreed to take care of everything while they were away. Their house was a lot nicer than my apartment too, so I was glad to do it. The first week went by, and it was great. It felt kind of like being in an Airbnb. But then one night, while sitting at the table in the kitchen, I heard a man cough right outside the house. It scared me because it was so close, being just outside the back door. I quickly walked over and turned on the outdoor lights to show that I was home. I waited a minute before looking out the window. Whoever was there was gone now, but why were they there in the first place? I stayed extra cautious for a while, but there was nothing else. It was a little past 7, and I had nothing to eat, so I went outside to go pick up some food, but as I was walking out, I noticed some footprints in the yard. The grass was pressed down, and there was a clear path they walked in. I followed them, going from the sidewalk to the back of the house, and then turning around and going back to the sidewalk. I got in my car and went out for food, but thought about it while driving. I couldn't come up with any reason someone would do that. It really just seemed pointless. When I got back to the house, I did a quick search for any more footprints in the grass, but didn't see anything. I went back inside and sat down to watch TV. After an hour, I was starting to get sleepy, so I shut it off and got in bed, sitting up on my phone for a bit. That's when I heard someone outside again. They were walking through the front yard. I listened as they went up to the front door, and then went around to the back door. I got up, more alert now, as I heard the back door shifting around like they were trying to open it. I went to the top of the stairs and flipped the light switch, turning on the downstairs lights. The person stopped. I walked down a few steps, then leaned over the railing and looked at the back door. Nobody was there anymore, and for some reason, that terrified me even more. Seconds later, I saw shards of glass flying across the living room as I heard a window shatter. From where I was standing, I couldn't see it, but I immediately ran upstairs and into the bedroom. I heard a few coughs, then the glass crunching as they stepped inside. As soon as they were in, everything turned to chaos. It was like they were pushing everything over, hitting and breaking things. I called the police, but I feared they wouldn't make it in time to help me. After a minute of destroying the bottom floor, the intruder ran up the steps and went into one of the spare bedrooms, doing the same thing. Then he came up to the bedroom that I was in. He tried opening the door, but I had locked it. Instead of leaving, he started smashing something against it, trying to break it down. One of the panels from the door nearly flew off, allowing them to reach in and open it. The man stepped in. He was wearing a face mask and a hoodie and was holding a metal baseball bat. I was in the corner of the room, holding back tears as he looked at me in rage. But then he looked away and started smashing the walls and furniture all around the room. He didn't even acknowledge me. He just went around me, destroying the entire room in as little time as possible. Then he ran past me and went into the next room before he finally went downstairs and left the house. I stood in that same spot, frozen, until the police came. My friend came back early the next day to deal with the situation, but basically everything in the house was trashed and destroyed, but nothing was stolen. The police said it almost certainly had to be someone she knew that had something against her, but she couldn't think of anyone who would do this to her. I tried to give a description of the man, but he was fully covered, so I wasn't of much help. The most terrifying part was that the man just ignored me, confidently unthreatened by me. To this day, whoever that was hasn't been back to my friend's house, and their motive still remains unknown. This happened to me last year. I worked at a gas station, which I know is very typical for these sorts of things, but when you actually work there, you never really expect anything to happen to you. This night, it was raining outside. Not too heavily, but enough to make it uncomfortable to be outside without any sort of covering. In weather like this, there's a lot less people coming into the convenience store to grab snacks or pay for gas with cash, so my job is to just be there. I'd occasionally walk around the store to stretch my legs and stay awake, but I'd spend most of my time on my phone. As I was looking through my social media feeds, I suddenly heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was tapping on the glass door. I looked up from my phone and saw a figure standing outside in the rain. It was a man, his face hidden by the hood of his jacket. I waved, showing he could just walk in and that the door wasn't locked. He didn't move, though. He just kept tapping on the door as if he didn't see me. I walked over and pulled the door open, greeting him. He didn't look at me, but walked right past me and over to the counter. It was almost comical in my head how oblivious this guy was. I went back around the counter and the man asked for a pack of cigarettes, then paid with cash. He walked out, and that's when I looked out the window and noticed there were no cars in the parking section or by the gas pumps. The man walked off until he reached the road, then continued walking along the shoulder, through the rain like it was nothing. I would have been a lot less confused if he had bought a gas container or something, assuming his car ran out down the road, or even broke down, but he just got a pack of smokes and left. With nothing better to do, that's all I thought about over the next hour. It was just such an odd thing. I came to no further sensible conclusions, though, and ended up stopping some items to continue passing the time. While doing so, I heard someone tapping on the door again. I walked around the aisle and saw that same man standing outside. I walked over and opened the door. "Are you all right?" I asked. He didn't respond. "You can borrow the phone if you need," I said, trying to offer any assistance. "Down the road," he said. I peeked my head out and tried looking, but saw nothing in the distance. But then my gaze fell on a gas container sitting by one of the pumps. He pointed at it and said help, which was when I realized he probably didn't speak much English. I said sure and walked out to the pump with him. He handed me a credit card and I started pumping the gas into the container. The man was standing behind me like he was trying to stay out of my view, which made me uncomfortable. Once the container was full, I quickly handed it over and started walking back, but the guy stopped me, grabbing my arm. He started speaking quickly, but I couldn't understand him. I pulled away and started walking back to the doors, but then he yelled something like he was talking to someone else. And just as I reached the door, I saw a man on the other side of the counter shoving everything into his backpack. He looked up at me and instantly jumped over the counter. But then, everything went black. I woke up laying on the floor with a massive headache. It seemed to only be a couple minutes after the incident, and I almost immediately realized that the guy behind me had hit me over the head in an effort to help his buddy escape. I got the cops over and they took me to the hospital, but I had no serious injuries aside from a concussion and needing a few stitches. The worst part of it all is the embarrassment I felt afterwards, like I'd been played so easily and let them get away with it. Honestly though, I'm thankful that I got hit over the head and blacked out before anything else happened, because the CCTV footage showed the guy inside holding a gun. If I had tried to stop him, or even shown I was a threat in any way, I could have been put down and never woken up. I'm a 31-year-old female, and this happened when I was 29, back in 2020. My friend, let's call her Stacy, told me that she had a friend, who I'll call Brianne, that needed a dog sitter because Brianne and her husband were going on a vacation to California. Stacy knew I dog sat on an app called Rover, which is an app where you house sit random strangers' dogs, walk them, you name it. I thought it was the perfect opportunity since I was in need of some cash. $200 to dog sit for 5 days. Why not, right? Brianne showed me around her house a week before I dog sat, while also letting me meet her huge husky named Bear. I'm not going to lie, it was a big husky, a little overweight too, but still adorable. Brianne told me that I was welcome to help myself to whatever food I wanted. The front door also included a lock where you punch in a number code to get in, so it was pretty secure. So, a week rolls around, and I showed up later on a Friday night, not too long after Brianne and her husband left the house to go to California. Things were pretty chill for the first 2 days. I was at work for most of the afternoon, went to feed the dog on my break, came back later at night, and would take Bear for rides in my car. I stayed up late watching movies, and let Bear sleep by me when it was time to go to bed. Anyway, after work on a Monday night, I hear a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a guy that looked like he was wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit odd, but opened the door to see what was up. "Hello, I'm looking for a George," he said. "George?" I thought. "Oh, no, there's no George here. I'm dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday." Looking back, it was pretty stupid to tell a random person at the door I didn't know that I was alone. "Oh, okay. How long are you here?" he said. "Till Wednesday," I responded. "Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you." And then he left. I was slightly weirded out and locked the door. I texted Brienne about what just happened. She pretty much just said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again up until I went to bed Wednesday at midnight. As I was laying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked it. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep, then woke up at 3:05 a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It freaked me out a little. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room, where I saw Bear was growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy, with another guy this time, standing there in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone? I didn't bother opening the door this time. Two guys I didn't know, dressed like security guards at 3 a.m. I made sure all the doors were locked. When I saw that they had walked off, I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have to think Bear. I think his barking could have been what scared them off. I went back inside, then went to bed and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling Brienne because she was in Cali anyway. I'm glad to say I only stayed one more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, and I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. Last year, I went on a long 10-day road trip. It wasn't to any single place. I just drove in a big loop, stopping at 5 or 6 different cities. I actually didn't book any hotels in advance because I wasn't sure exactly how long I would spend in each city or where I would want to take breaks during the drive, so I was relying on hotels allowing walk-ins. The first 5 nights, I was able to find decent hotels on the course of my drives, but the 6th night, I ran into some issues. I was driving between cities and felt my eyes getting heavy around 11 p.m. I wanted to keep going and get to the next major city and then sleep in a parking lot or something, but there was no way I could make it when I was so sleepy already. I pulled over and contacted a few big-name hotels that were on the way, but none of them were accepting walk-ins at the time. I was getting nervous, thinking I might have to park on the side of the road and sleep, which was obviously dangerous, but then I saw a sign for a hotel 10 miles ahead. I drove until I reached the building, then parked by the front. The hotel was small, looking more like a motel, being a single story with a bunch of rooms. There were a few other cars in the parking lot, but it was mostly empty. I got out and went up to the reception desk, asking the woman there if I could have a room. Luckily, they had one available, and she gave me a key card. I got my bag from the car and brought it to the room. It was really outdated, but for the price, it wasn't all that bad. But only a minute after I went inside, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it a crack, just to see who it was. There was a man mumbling something to himself, and right when he saw the door open, he pushed into it, trying to force himself into the room while still talking to himself. I put my arm out and stopped him, preventing the man from fully entering. He stopped talking and looked up at me as I told him to leave. After a second, he turned around and walked away. I made sure he actually left, then locked the door. It was really weird, but I didn't feel too threatened because I was sure it was just some crackhead who was lost. I stayed up another 15 minutes, then fell asleep. A couple hours into the night, I woke up to a knock on the door. I was immediately irritated, knowing it had to be that man from earlier. Having learned my lesson, I put the chain bolt on the door before cracking it open. It was a good thing I did, because the second I unlocked the door, the man rammed into it. He started yelling random sentences that made no sense. I backed up right away and called 911. The man didn't let up, though. He continued slamming into the door, trying to break in. A minute into the chaos, the man shoved a knife between the door and tried cutting the chain. There was no way I could cut it, but it definitely horrified me to know that he had a knife with him. The yelling, banging, and cutting went on for several minutes before it went quiet. Police showed up a while later, but the man was gone. I don't know what was wrong with him or why he wanted to get inside my room so bad, but he definitely had some bad intentions. It may have just been because he was drugged up, but breaking into someone's room with a knife is horrifying. All it takes is one wrong move, like answering a door or leaving it unlocked, for someone like him to take advantage. I don't think he had something against me personally, but I still have this feeling sometimes, like I'm being watched. This was in 2015. I had taken a road trip to a forest a few hours from me. There was a hike up to an abandoned fire lookout that I was really excited to explore. I should mention it was technically illegal to go inside it or camp in it, as it wasn't kept up with and could be structurally unstable. I'd done some research online though, and most people said that it seemed okay, but the last post I could find about it was 3 years ago, so I really didn't know what I'd find when I got up there. Anyway, I found a small ditch on the side of the road that I could park in. Then I got out my backpack with 2 days worth of gear and started the hike. With trips like this, there aren't usually defined paths to get there, so I used a handheld satellite GPS that allowed me to make sure I was going the right way. But really, the whole time I was just cutting through unknown terrain in the woods. The hike from the road was about 4 to 5 hours. The further in I got, the more dense and rough the terrain got. I was really banking on the fire lookout to still be intact and good enough for me to camp out in, but I guess if not, then I was just going to have to find somewhere else nearby to set up my tent and sleep at. After the pretty tiring several hours of hiking through the woods, I finally got there. I could see the building peeking out above the trees, and when I got closer, it actually looked decently in shape. The paint was worn off, of course, but it seemed to be holding up well. I gave the support beams a few pushes, and they were really solid, so I tried my luck climbing up the ladder. It was metal and felt sturdy, but still creaked with every step up. When I got to the top, I was in awe for a moment at the views. I could see basically the entire forest. There were no buildings or roads or houses for miles in all directions. It was just the woods. After taking in the view, I went around the ledge and inside the lookouts. It was really small, not like one of those big ones that you see get turned into Airbnbs or whatever. This was just one room, maybe 150 square feet. It had a decaying bed in the corner and an old wooden desk in the other corner, with rotting windows spanning the entire wall. There wasn't too much else to look at in there, so I put my bag down and rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, then heated up a meal on my mini camping stove. Once the sun was setting, I walked out to the ledge and watched it. It was by far one of the best views I'd ever seen. I felt like it went by quick though, and then it was just darkness. It was cloudy out too, so no moonlight or stars were lighting up the sky. With nothing else to do though, I stayed sitting out on the ledge for a while. It was probably an hour into the night when I saw something below me. There was a light moving around in the trees. What was strange about it though was it wasn't like an artificial light. It had this orangish hue, and was kind of flickering, kind of like a campfire would, which led me to believe it was a torch. It was moving between the trees in the forest, not too far from where I was. The chances of someone else being out here at the same time as me in such a remote part of the woods were really slim, given there wasn't even a trail to get here. Also, traveling around at night without a normal flashlight and using a torch was pretty odd. I watched as the light moved under the trees for a while. Then it went behind something where I could no longer see it. For the next 30 minutes, I never saw it appear again. I still stayed out on the ledge, though, taking in the calmness and quietness of the night. Eventually, the wind started to make it a bit cold, so I stood up to take in one last view before heading inside. When I looked below the ledge, though, someone was there. They were standing at the bottom in the grassy area between the fire lookout in the woods. It looked like they were looking directly up at me. Maybe it was the person with the light I saw earlier. "Hello?" I called out. I didn't know what else to say. They didn't move or say anything back to me. It was just this strange 10 or 15 seconds of looking at each other before they lifted up their hand, like in an acknowledging way or apologizing. Then they turned around and walked into the woods, still with no light on. Obviously, that was incredibly creepy and eerie, but for some reason in the moment, I felt so sure that it was just another hiker wanting to stay on the lookout and was probably just looking up, trying to see if anyone was inside already. Why he hesitated to respond and only lifted his hand up, I don't know. I stayed outside for a little longer, but not seeing anything else, I went inside and got my sleeping bag to warm up. It was a little bit hard to fall asleep because of the wind hitting the windows and the wooden beams creaking under me, but eventually I did manage to pass out. It's hard to really know how much time passed, but when I woke up, the wind had settled down and it was still very dark outside. I opened my eyes, wondering why I was suddenly awake, but then I heard a familiar sound. The soft metal creak of the ladder outside. I sat up, thinking I must be mistaken, but then I heard it again and again. Someone was climbing up the ladder. I couldn't tell how far up or down they were. I could just hear the hinges at the top of the ladder creak with every step up they took. Outside the windows, though, it was completely dark. I unzipped my sleeping bag and got up, heart racing as I grabbed my backpack and walked onto the ledge. During the 20 or so seconds that it took to get up, the creaking got louder and faster, like they were hurrying, before it suddenly stopped just as I made it out to the ledge. I stood in place for a moment, waiting for another sound. Then I slowly walked around the walkway and peered around the corner at the opening to the ladder. No one was there. I carefully walked closer and felt my heart rate increasing as I leaned over and looked down. Nobody was on the ladder. I was just in shock for a second, confused and scared and unsure what the hell was going on. Then a sudden sequence of footsteps came rushing around the wooden walkway behind me. I only caught a glimpse of their dark figure running between the windows on the other side. I didn't hesitate to lower myself onto the ladder and hurry down. It was terrifying, trying to climb down the slippery metal ladder as my whole body was shaking from the adrenaline rush, with someone chasing right above me. I got halfway down before I saw their head peer out from above. I didn't stop until I got to the bottom and into the woods. Honestly, I don't know why I even grabbed my backpack when I got up to see what was going on. But it was the best decision I ever made, maybe even saved my life. With my flashlight and GPS on me, I was able to hike my way out of there and back to my car. As far as I know, I wasn't followed. I drove away and never looked back. I was camping at a small lake for the weekend. Really, this wasn't supposed to be anything special, Just a few days in the woods by the water to relax and nothing more. The first day was exactly that. I got there, set up camp, and chilled for the whole day and night. This was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It had a thin footpath leading to it, but it wasn't marked on any maps online or anything, so only locals would probably know about it. My dad used to take me here when I was a kid. In all my years going out to that spot, both as a kid with my dad and as an adult by myself, never once was anyone else here. Honestly, there was never even any signs of anyone else ever having been there. Anyway, on my second day, I spend my time walking around the water and I guess just thinking to myself, I must have circled the lake 3 or 4 times. During those hours of walking, everything was quiet and nice. But then, on one of my laps around the lake, I happened to spot some footprints in the dirt, just on the edge of the tree line. I had been walking the same circle over and over, and never saw them before. Where they were, it was so clear and obvious, I don't think I would have missed them. They also looked pretty new, and what was really strange was not only that the footprints meant somebody else was out here, but that they were literal footprints, like barefoot, not shoe prints. The part of the lake I was at didn't even have any easy access to the water, so it's not like they took their boots off before going for a swim, not to mention I would have seen them in the lake. Seeing this really creeped me out for some reason. Why didn't I see them nearby while I was walking around? Were they watching me and didn't want me to see them? It was hard not to get paranoid about it. From what I was able to see, it looked like the footprints went up to the tree line looking out at the lake, then right back into the woods, where it seemed to go straight back for a while. I didn't want to follow them into that unknown territory of the forest, so I just walked back to my campsite. I kept looking out to the lake, or I guess the tree line around the lake, seeing if anyone was out there. I never saw anyone. As the sun started to come down, the paranoia started to build up again. Something about the footprints just felt off, and knowing that they were likely still nearby, it wasn't a comforting feeling. When it got darker, I fueled up my campfire with a good supply of wood and sat around it. I did whatever I could to keep my mind off of it, but it was pretty difficult. Part of me felt justified in feeling uneasy, and another part of me felt like I was overreacting for no reason. But not too far into the night, I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. I instantly turned and faced the darkness they were coming from. There were more than one. It sounded like 2 people, slowly walking closer to my campsite. I stared in their direction until they suddenly came into the light. It was a man and a woman walking next to each other and stopping just at the edge of where the light from the fire could reach. I couldn't see much of their faces, or really anything more than their basic shape. I couldn't even tell how old or young they were. "Can I help you?" As soon as I said that, the woman turned and sprinted back into the woods, completely disappearing. But the man stayed where he was. He didn't move or even look back at the woman. It was about then that I looked down and realized he wasn't wearing any shoes. These were definitely the ones who were out by the lake. I asked again if I could help him, but then he too turned around and quietly walked back into the woods. I pretty much had an internal freakout after that. That was the most unsettling and strange encounter I'd ever had, almost not even feeling real. I didn't want to be in those woods for another second. I immediately started to pack my things. I'm not the kind of person to stick around when things get sketchy. Thankfully, my setup was easy to put up and take down, so I had everything tied down in my bag and ready to go within a few minutes. I didn't know where they went, but I didn't want to still be here if they came back. I kicked out all the unlit logs from the fire so it would burn out soon after I left. Then I hurried into the woods. The walk was nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was really on edge, unsure if I was being followed, but the further away I got, the better I felt. It was about 40 minutes into the walk. The whole woods was silent, not even any crickets or anything, when I suddenly heard running footsteps nearby. It was in the distance, maybe 100 feet from me, and it was definitely a person. I couldn't see anything though, so I had to just keep walking. Only a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on the other side of me. The footsteps seemed quieter than they should have been, too, which led me to believe that they were running barefoot, and that it was the same two I'd seen at the lake. If they'd been stalking me this far into the woods, who knows what they were trying to do. For a while, I'd keep hearing running footsteps in the distance, just short bursts, like they were quietly stalking me and then suddenly sprinting away. I can't think of anything that would have been more terrifying than that walk through the woods. Somehow, though, I made it back to my truck. I was able to make it out of there. I wish I had more to say, or that I figured out who that man and woman were, or what they were doing out there. But I have nothing. Maybe I'm insane, but sometimes I wonder if they were even alive or not. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I never went back. I'm a 24-year-old female from northern Arizona. This was a couple years ago. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van, traveling along the West Coast. There is a lot of different lifestyles. People like to live in these types of vans, or RVs. I always tried to keep out of the big cities and stick to small towns for camping in between destinations. But for the most part, I liked to camp out in the back country. Being in the middle of the woods, with nobody else around, was where I found myself most comfortable and where I most enjoyed the lifestyle of traveling. I think part of it is that it was always safer to be out by yourself in the forest than it was to be stealth camping in a busy parking lot in the middle of a city. Don't get me wrong, it could still get creepy at night, but I always know I'm better off out there with nobody around. This week, I was slowly traveling between two big cities in Washington. I was taking my time, staying on the back roads and hunkering down at campsites for several days at a time. On this day, I pulled off the road and onto a small dirt trail going deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off spots, but none were taken, and it looked like nobody had been down here in a while, so I kept going, hoping to secure a larger and more scenic spot. At the end, there was a large circle to pull off on. It wasn't scenic, just surrounded by trees, but it was large and secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone circle in the middle for a campfire. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was the middle of spring, it was raining pretty much every day here in Washington, so there wasn't much for me to do outside. I opened the side door to my van for some fresh air while I cooked a meal on my propane stove. It was around sunset, so I still had several hours before I'd be in bed. Over the next 30 minutes, the sun fell past the horizon, and the rain started picking up. I shut the door to keep the water out, and instead cracked open one of the small windows near the back of the van. I sat on the bed and watched a show on my laptop, but midway through it, a glare came in from the open window behind me. It was a light reflecting onto the screen of my laptop. Before I was able to react, it went away. It didn't move away, though. It turned off, as if someone switched the light off. When I turned around and looked out the window, I saw nothing. It was really dark and still pouring down outside. I had no way to know how far the light came from, or what it even was. Being on a trail with other pull-off spots, I had to assume it was just another camper, maybe their headlights that somehow found its way through the trees and shined into my window. Then they quickly turned their vehicle off. The only problem with that was the light didn't come from the road I came down. Behind my window was just trees. Maybe there was another trail I didn't know about. There wasn't much investigating I could do anyway, so I turned back around and went back on my laptop. Occasionally, I'd check out the windows, or think I'd heard something outside, but with the rain clinking against the metal roof, it wasn't clear if I was actually hearing something or not. Every time I looked, though, I never saw anything to confirm that something was out there, so I didn't worry myself too much. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 when I decided to call it in for the night and try to sleep. I turned off everything in the van, closed all the windows, and drew the shades. It was nearly pitch black inside. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Usually, I didn't have much trouble at all, but tonight I just couldn't manage to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the rain picked up even more after an hour, and thunder started rolling in. It was very loud and made it impossible to even try to sleep. About 2 hours into the night, and through all the harsh rain and thunder, I swear I heard something move outside. It was just loud enough for me to know I really heard something. It sounded like someone or something running and kicking over a branch on the ground, somewhere just outside of my van. As soon as I heard it, there were no other sounds. It was so dark, I couldn't even see the ground beneath the window. The longer I looked out there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had this feeling like someone else was looking back at me. I put the window cover back down. I sat there and tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But only a minute later, I heard a voice. It was a male voice, kind of in a loud whisper, like they were talking to someone else. I sat in silence, too scared to open the covers and look out the windows again, knowing they'd probably see me if they hadn't already. However, they likely already could assume someone was in the van, which makes it all the more terrifying. There was a good 2 or 3 minutes where I didn't hear anything aside from the rain and thunder before there was suddenly something outside the sliding side door to the van. It sounded like bending plastic, like someone was leaning against the side door. Then there was a knock. A few seconds later, they knocked again. Even though I was sure they knew I was in here already, I still was too scared to speak. Maybe they weren't sure how many people were inside, or if I was a man or woman, so I felt safer not giving them anything and just staying quiet. A very disturbing and anxious 5 minutes went by as the knocking continued every few seconds without anyone saying anything. They had to be drenched by now and probably couldn't see at all through this weather. But then they finally said something. "Sheriff's Department, open up." What? I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why wouldn't they have said that from the beginning? They continued knocking and calling out different lines, all basically stating that they were an officer and I needed to open the door. This seemed like a desperate attempt to get me to open up without violence. I slowly lifted the window cover and looked out. All I could see was a dark figure moving near the door, but from the shape of it, it didn't look like he had any sort of law enforcement gear on, so I was sure this was about to get really bad. I debated in my head what to do for 30 seconds, as it felt like the knocking got more and more impatient before I decided to risk getting into the driver's seat and trying to drive away. As soon as I went up there and turned the car on, I heard 2 sets of footsteps running up to the side of the van. I began pulling out just as a figure appeared in the window next to me. Thank God the van didn't get stuck and I was able to get out onto the trail. As I drove away, I never saw any other vehicle down the road, which makes the intentions of these unknown people likely really disturbing. I put in a report with the county, who of course said no officers were out there that night, but I never got any follow-up. Things could have gotten really bad out there, but I haven't had anything else happen since then. I was staying at my friend's place for the weekend. She was away on a trip with her family, but she had a small cat that was afraid of thunderstorms, and this weekend we were supposed to get a really bad storm. Her cat was very independent though, usually just sitting alone in whichever room she felt like. It started storming the day before my friend left, and it continued throughout the whole weekend. This was on Saturday. I had spent the night there with no issues at all. Her cat, Molly, did fine with the storm. That morning, I enjoyed relaxing on her comfy couch and reading. I always loved staying at my friend's place because it was out in the woods. It felt so isolated and peaceful. Midway through the day, though, a call came in on the home phone. This was back when those were a common thing. I checked in case it was her trying to reach me, but it said unknown number, so I didn't answer. But a few minutes later, a call came through again. It said the same thing, unknown number. It rang out, but this time a voice came through on the answering machine. It was a quiet, male voice. They just said one word, my friend's name, as if asking if she could hear him. He then hung up after a couple seconds of silence. I didn't know if this was someone she was talking to, or like a family member or something, so I just texted her to let her know that someone called the home phone. I did find it strange that it came up as an unknown caller, though. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more calls came in from that same number, but no more voice messages. My friend never responded either. I guess they were pretty busy. I didn't worry myself about it, though. I figured it was nothing. I made food and really spent the rest of the day not doing much of anything. Later, say around 8 or 9, I found a movie to watch upstairs in the bedroom. I got about halfway through it before remembering to check on Molly and make sure she had food and water. I went downstairs, but was confused to see her standing right at the front door, staring at the crack in the doorway, like she was waiting for it to open. I called her name, and she looked at me, but only for a moment before looking back at the door. It kind of creeped me out, if I'm being honest. I walked up to the door and hesitantly looked out the peephole at the porch. The glass had fogged up from all the rain, so everything was blurry and I couldn't really make out anything. But then something moved, enough for me to tell there was something, or someone, standing on the other side of the porch. I felt a little unsettled, but I continued to watch, trying to get a clearer view of what I was seeing. I really wanted to know for sure if there was someone out there, but I also didn't want to open the door if there was someone there. 2 to 3 minutes went by without any changes in what I could see. I thought I was just scaring myself for no reason. After all, if someone was out there, they would have knocked on the door by now. I left the door to go check on Molly's food and water and grab myself some snacks for the movie. When I passed by the door again, Molly wasn't there anymore. I looked out just to double check, and something looked different. It was still fogged up and blurry, but one of the shapes I saw wasn't there anymore, like it just disappeared. Was there really someone standing there the whole time? Feeling off about everything, I picked Molly up and brought her to the bedroom with me. I turned the movie back on and sat on the bed. The whole time the movie was playing, I couldn't shake a really unsettling feeling I had. 30 minutes went by, when suddenly Molly jumped off the bed and walked up to the bedroom door. She didn't scratch at it or look back at me like she wanted to go out. She just stared at the crack in the doorway, exactly the same as she did at the front door, like someone was out there. My heart immediately started racing. I called her name in a shaky voice, but her focus was locked on the door. I got up from the bed and quietly walked over, then leaned my ear against the door. I couldn't hear anything. I then crouched down and peered under the crack between the floor. My whole body aggressively shot back. There was someone standing right outside the door, just a couple inches away. My eyes immediately looked at the doorknob. I had never even locked it. I snapped the lock down, and almost right away, the person on the other side ran away from the door. They went downstairs, where I could no longer hear anything. I called 911, then called my friend. By the time cops got there, the house was empty and nobody was around. With all the information, it seemed that the intruder was likely a stalker, probably the same one who kept calling. So they tried to trace the phone number, but had no luck. It was pretty much left at that. I feel bad for my friend because whoever that man was, he was definitely stalking her and not me. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that they showed up during the weekend she was gone, or if they were trying to break into what they thought would be an empty home. After all, I never answered the phone, so they probably were confident the house was empty. Maybe they were planning to wait and catch her off guard when she eventually got back from vacation. We never found out who they were or what they were doing.